Welcome to the Zoom Wednesday night Bible study, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Tonight is lesson 2 of an interim Bible study I'm calling Pivotal Passages. If I could only teach or preach one chapter of a biblical book, what would it be and why? What chapter in a biblical book is pivotal to its overall themes? The aim is to identify that one passage that helps in understanding the entire book, and maybe also to explain how that passage or book fits into the larger story of the entire Christian Bible. And now this is a subjective list, and so that means that your choice of a pivotal passage is just as valid as mine. But don't worry, this Bible study will not be 66 weeks. But we might return to this study at other interims in the future. Last week, my pivotal passage for Genesis was Genesis 12, the call of Abraham and Sarah. There were several good passages to choose from in Genesis. I'm sure that most of you were not surprised at my choice. But tonight, as I pick a pivotal passage for the book of Exodus, my choice may surprise you. But I hope that you will stay with me till the end, as I will try to connect it to the bigger story of the Bible, and in particular to Jesus. Now, in the book of Exodus, there's a lot of passages to choose from. You've got how the book of Exodus opens about 400 plus years after Joseph, when the memory of Joseph had faded and the population of the Hebrews had grown so much, and now they found themselves enslaved in Egypt. Then you got the story of the birth of Moses and the miraculous rescue of his life from sure death in the Nile River. And then there's that 40 years of Moses living as a fugitive until the burning bush encounter, which sets up Moses's call to go back to Egypt and lead God's people out. And then, of course, you've got the dramatic Exodus story that includes the plagues and the mad rush out of Egypt, only to be pursued by the Egyptians and trapped by the Red Sea. And we all know what happens at the Red Sea. And then we get to Exodus 19, and things begin to slow down as Israel finds itself at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah, including what we call the Ten Commandments. Any of those passages would be justified, but none of them are my choice. Instead, I'm going with this. We'll pick it up in Exodus 24, the last verse in Exodus 24. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. That's Mount Sinai. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to take for me an offering from all whose hearts prompt them to give you shall receive the offering for me. This is the offering that you shall receive. And they shall make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell among them. In accordance with all that I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it." And then in 29, "I will dwell among the Israelites, and I will be their God, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God." Why have I chosen the passages that are about the construction of the tabernacle as the pivotal passages of Exodus? and not the Exodus story itself. Why did I choose these pivotal passages? And they can be numbingly boring as you read. They're so detailed. But why have I chosen the construction of the tabernacle? And I hope I can give you the answer to that without going full Bible geek, Bible nerd on you. I'm going to try my best. Reason one, the building of the tabernacle and thus allowing God to dwell among God's people was one of the primary reasons for the Exodus. And here is the Jewish commentary on those last two verses in Exodus 29. These concluding verses echo the promise of chapter 25, verse 8, which I read to you just a second ago, and 6:7, which is, I am the Lord your God, tying the Exodus narrative and the tabernacle instructions into one overarching structure of meaning. With the tabernacle finished, God will dwell among the Israelites as promised in 25 verse 8 and fulfill the covenant with them by being their God as promised in chapter 6 verse 7. And the Israelites will understand that these were the ultimate purpose of the Exodus, that I might dwell among them. These verses emphasize the ultimate goal of the Exodus, not only freedom from servitude, but living in the presence of God. In this respect, the goal of the Exodus is already achieved even before reaching the promised land. This might explain why the Torah is complete without the depiction of the conquest in the book of Joshua. It is the indwelling of the divine presence rather than the conquest of the land that culminates the Exodus. However, the same goal will be achieved in the promised land when the temple is built. Now, let that sink in. One of the primary reasons for the Exodus, you could even argue was the reason for the Exodus, was for God to dwell, to be with God's beloved. Now, folks, that's love. God desires to be with us, often way more than our desire to be with God. Now, the second reason, and I get really excited about this one, the second reason the building of the tabernacle is so pivotal is that it is a microcosm of the creation story. There is an arch that runs from Genesis 1-2 all the way to Exodus 25 through 40. The creation story, Genesis 1 and 2, the creation story is the ultimate tabernacle or temple where God dwells with humanity. And in many ways, Exodus 25 through 40, the story of the tabernacle, answers the aim of Genesis 1 and 2. Creation, in a way, is renewed. Heaven, with the tabernacle, heaven and earth are held together again. God is once again dwelling among God's people, and the world is halted from its slide back into chaos. And you know what? The tabernacle is presented in Exodus as a microcosmos, as a little world, a little cosmos, a space. The tabernacle is a space where the world is once again what it was meant to be. Now, I don't have time to go into great detail, but let me drop a few little notes that back up this reading of the tabernacle story. Stay with me now. In Exodus 25 through 40, Moses is told to build the tabernacle according to the pattern or order that God gives. Now, the creation story in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4 is all about God bringing order out of the chaos of the deep. And now in Exodus, Moses is instructed to build this tabernacle according to the orders, according to the pattern that God gives. This is not going to be humanity's creation. This is going to be God's creation. Also interesting that the phrase, "the Lord said to Moses," appears 7 times in the story of the tabernacle. It echoes Genesis 1, and God said, "Let there be light, let there be whatever." There are 7 stages of building a tabernacle or a temple, and there are 7 days or stages of creation. And get this, of the 7 times the phrase, "the Lord said to Moses," the first 6 are in regard to the building of the tabernacle or its furnishings. But the 7th time the phrase, "the Lord said to Moses," is uttered, it is the instruction to observe the Sabbath rest. You see the connections? And there's many more, but I just don't have the time to go into them. Even the Ark of the Covenant has echoes of creation. In Psalm 80 and in Psalm 99, the Ark of the Covenant is viewed as God's footstool. But elsewhere in the scripture, it is creation, it is the world that is God's footstool. And even the lampstand that is right outside of the tent of meeting, we know it as the menorah. That the way that lampstand is constructed, it mimics the tree of life and its branches. You know, the connections to creation in the story of the tabernacle is amazing. And the reason that this is so exciting, at least to me, is it just shows God's intentions for the new creation to happen. Even if it's derailed, God never cuts and runs. When Israel does enter the promised land, as we read the Jewish commentary a while ago, the same new creation, the same microcosmos is repeated with the building of the temple. But we know that that fails too. But then there's Jesus. All of the Gospels give us temple theology, but no gospel does it better than the Gospel of John. More than the others, John tells the story of Jesus through the lens of the tabernacle and the temple, and that Jesus is the new creation, the new and eternal space where heaven and earth come together. And here's just a sampling, and this is going to be a very familiar passage of scripture, but I hope it brings it all together. John chapter 1. And as we read this, just note all of the echoes of creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness. Creation, creation, creation. And the darkness did not overtake it. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of natural descent, nor urge of flesh, nor human will, but of God. And get this. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And the Greek means tabernacle. So and the Word became flesh and tabernacled with us. And we have seen his glory. Exodus and the tabernacle talks about the glory of God filling the tabernacle. And so Jesus comes and tabernacles with us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a parent's only child, full of grace and truth. From his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. And then note what John does. He connects it with Moses. That's where we've been at. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. Moses never got to do that. It is the only Son, himself God, who is close to the heart of God, who has made God known. John also places Jesus's cleansing of the temple at the beginning of Jesus's ministry instead of in the last week as the other gospels do. So that from the very beginning, Jesus declares, at the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus declares himself to be the temple. Jesus declares himself to be the tabernacle, the place where God and humanity meet. And John tells the story of Jesus, just like Exodus 25 through 40 does, in the context of new creation. And it is the resurrection of Jesus that solidifies it. I hope that you see why I chose the pivotal passages in Exodus to be the ones about the purpose of the Exodus. That is, so God can once again dwell with God's people. And it gives us a foretaste of the new creation that started for good with the resurrection of Jesus and will culminate when Eden, when creation is restored and the new Jerusalem comes down from heaven in Revelation 21. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, see the home, in Greek, see the tabernacle of God is among humankind. God will dwell with them, and they will be God's people, and God will be with them and be their God. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the old order has passed away. You see, the tabernacle does connect with the greater story of the Bible from Genesis 1 all the way to Revelation 22. And that's why, to me at least, the story of the tabernacle is the pivotal passage of Exodus. I'm out of time to really talk about the takeaways, but I just leave you with this. Remember God's desire to restore and make new, and nothing's going to stop it. Remember, God's desire to be with us is greater than our desire to be with God. Remember that God's love never ends, and God's love pursues us. And the ultimate new creation that started with Jesus's resurrection is on its way. But until that day, Jesus continues to tabernacle with us. And we are to be Christ's image bearers in the world. Until next week, God's abundant grace and peace.